Hello, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation today, you can type them into the Q&A located on the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen. We will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and those registered for Crop Talk will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 16th edition of Crop Talk, and this will be our first one for the growing season. So we will be having one basically every Wednesday now throughout the growing season. And last week when I was getting ready or starting to prepare, I took a picture on the right-hand side there of all the snow that was still up in my area, and was thinking that maybe we were getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves. But it's amazing what a week will do, or not even a full week. And now that same field has no snow on it at all, and it was canola stubble last year, so it's and very little water, actually, surprisingly. At least I think, anyways, a lot of the water, snow is gone, and we don't see a lot of standing water yet. So we might get out a little quicker. I know when you talk to some of the other areas in the province, there's some areas until the last snowstorm where actually had no snow already at all. So in those areas, I could actually see next 7 to 10 days, maybe we might see the odd guy scratching around or getting eager. One of our first guys that normally would get going, but so we're not too far away. So for this edition of Crop Talk, I thought it'd be good to get John Gavloski to come on and do an insect update, and maybe kind of get us in that prep mode as to when, before we're getting out in the field, things we need to be looking for, things we need to watch for, and kind of just an overall general update on insects. And so I thought it'd be good to start off with that. So with that, I will turn the screen over to John, and John, you can get going.
Okay, you can see my screen okay, can you, Lionel?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
If you click on the share screen button.
Yeah, okay, one sec. I've got my presentation up to my first slide here. So I don't know if you can switch your screen over, Lionel, or if I should...
John, you'll have to do the share screen on the bottom toolbar again and select which monitor.
Yeah, I just have to get there because, like I said, I had my first slide up.
Do you see Lionel's screen right now?
No, you'll have to give me a sec here to get there. Like I said, I had my first slide up ready to go, and there was nothing else on the screen. So, okay, I just have to get right out on my show then. And we'll do share screen.
It's starting to come. We're just seeing my name so far. At the bottom, you'll see your PowerPoint. So if you click on that, there you go.
There you
go. Okay.
And then display settings, yeah. And then just hide that bottom part. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties here. But yeah, now that we're into April and it's warming up, some insects are starting to come out. Pretty soon we'll be starting to see some of our potential crop pests emerging. So I thought it would be a good idea today to do a little bit of a update on some of the insects that you will be encountering pretty soon. And this slide here shows what I'm going to be covering today. I thought what I would do, instead of trying to cover a whole bunch of different insects, I'll focus on a few of them and maybe do a little bit of more of a diagnostic and maybe some tips on monitoring and scouting for cutworms, flea beetles, and grasshoppers. Then we're going to look at some new insecticides that have recently come onto the market. We'll talk a little bit about insecticide resistance for a couple of the insects. And then I'd like to go over some of the insect monitoring programs that we'll be doing in 2025. And I'll finish off by talking about some resources that are available to help you with your identification and also your management decision making. And so we'll start with the cutworms. And with cutworms, one of the things that's important to realize is that not all cutworms are alike. We divide cutworms into 4 basic groups. And this grouping is really based on the way they feed on plants. And so at the top of my screen here, subterranean. So these are cutworms like pale western, which we don't have a lot of here, and glassy cutworm. They do pretty much all their feeding below the soil. So trying to control them is a really difficult battle. Tunnelers, they're cutworms that will clip a plant and drag it into their tunnel. So again, a lot of their feeding is below ground, but they will surface a little bit. They're things like black cutworm. We don't see a lot of them. Mainly what we deal with here is the surface feeding and climbing cutworms. Surface feeding, meaning they feed at the surface. They do a lot of clipping. Climbing, they don't do a lot of clipping. They climb and they chomp away. So those are your 4 basic groupings. So I'll give an example of 3 of those groupings and talk about how that might impact what you see and some of your scouting. And I'll start with dingy cutworm. So this is probably one of our most common cutworms in Manitoba. And they overwinter as a larva. So once the weather warms up, they're already out there as a partially grown larva. They'll get a bit bigger, and they can be present for quite a long period of time. Sometimes they're present, well, again, once it warms up, late April, they can start to become active. Sometimes it's well into June before they're starting to turn to pupa. So they're one to start watching out for on the earlier side, just because they're already partially grown caterpillars. They're a climbing cutworm. They, instead of feeding at the surface and clipping the plants, they prefer to climb the plants and feed on them. Now, if the plants are tiny, sometimes they're defoliating whole plants. Other times, they're just leaving notches and feeding marks and then going back into the soil in the day to hide. So as a crop scout, climbing cutworms can be tricky because you see the feeding. You may not see the cutworm, especially something like dingy that will try to get under debris or into the soil. When you're scouting during the day, you will see feeding. You won't see any insects. So that can be confusing. Dig around those plants with the markings. See if it's a climbing cutworm like dingy cutworm, if you're just not seeing any insects that can explain the feeding damage. So that's dingy cutworm, a climbing cutworm. As far as an identifying feature, if you look at the back of dingy cutworm, it almost looks like they have tire tracks going down the back. It looks like someone drove a tractor over them, or a series of V's. That's one of the distinctive features of dingy cutworm. And so redback cutworm, again, they're a surface feeder. So what they do is, as caterpillars, they'll come out of the ground and they will feed on the stems of the plants at the ground level, and they cut the plants. When they're young, they may climb the plants and feed, but when they get to be older caterpillars, often they're clipping the stems and then feeding on the plants at ground level. So with a surface feeder like redback cutworm, redback dark-sided, they're surface feeders, you will see clipped plants on the ground. And as a crop scout or farmer, it's easier to make that connection. Yeah, that's cutworm damage. With redback cutworm, they overwinter as eggs. So right now, they will still be eggs in the soil. They won't be hatching yet. Once the soil warms up a bit, they will start to hatch. But you really don't take notice of some of the cutworms overwinter as eggs until later. It's usually getting well into May or towards the end of May when we really start taking notice of them. That's when most of the hatch is done, and the caterpillars are now getting big enough that they're causing damage. And on the right of the screen here, that's what the adult stage of redback cutworm looks like. However, they have different color morphs for the adults. So sometimes doing adult ID on cutworms can be tricky because some of them do have different color morphs. And I mentioned about below ground or subterranean cutworms. So here's an example. One we don't see a lot of, but occasionally we run across this. This is glassy cutworm. Now, glassy cutworm is more of a grass specialist. They like grassy plants. So forage grasses, sometimes cereal crops, sometimes corn. Those are the crops where you would find them. Glassy, it almost looks translucent. Very white, but again, it almost has that translucent look to it. Orangey head, brown plate in behind. So a more distinctive one and an easier one to ID when we do find them. They very rarely will come above ground. So the tricky part, if you do have a problem with them, it's really hit and miss whether an insecticide is going to do much. Their feeding is mainly on below ground parts of the plant, roots, and any part that's below ground. Very, very rarely would they come above ground. So trying to get control of them can be a real challenge. So, and no easy tips for you with glassy cutworm. But again, fortunately for us, they're not one of our more common species here. And so scouting for cutworms, again, getting to know your species is good. That'll give you some indication on what you're dealing with. It's often good to take into account the size of the cutworm as well. So I've put some sizes here for fully grown, dingy, and red-backed. Once they get to be about 35, 38 centimeters, so roughly 1.5 inches long, they're fully grown and they'll be turning into pupa soon. When you get to that stage, if most of the caterpillars are that big, sometimes it's likely not going to be economical to control at that point because most of the damage has already been done. Ideally, you want to catch things before the caterpillars get to that stage if you've got a big population. Again, once they're starting to pupate, it doesn't really become economical to be controlling them. However, that's usually we're usually into June when we start seeing them pupating in any big way. It depends on the temperature. A warmer spring, they may start pupating sooner. Cooler spring, later, but it usually is into June, sometimes mid to even late June when we start seeing them turn to pupa in any big way. So May and early June are really critical months for scouting for cutworms. That's when they're going to be at those more intermediate stages where if there's a lot of them, you would want to be controlling them. And if you do need to control cutworms, note that they are nocturnal, so they feed in the day. They hide in the day, they feed at night. So ideally, getting the spray on as close to the evening as possible is good. That way it's fresh when they come out and start their feeding. Most of the sprays do have enough residual that even a day or two later, they still should be killing the cutworms. And this is good to know because when you're controlling cutworms, sometimes you could go into a field the day after a spray, and if you start poking around, you might find the odd live cutworm. And that doesn't necessarily mean your spray isn't working or there's resistance. Cutworms, like all insects, go through this process called molting, where to grow from one stage to the next, they have to shed their skin. Prior to shedding their cuticle, they will stop feeding. They clean their gut out, stop feeding, shed their cuticle. Then they have to increase their size and reharden their cuticle, then they start feeding again. So there can be this day or longer period where they're just not feeding because they're going through this molt, and it's often below ground if you're a cutworm where you're doing this. So if you do go out the day after an application and you find the odd live cutworm, don't panic right away. I would say give it another day or two, go recheck the field, and if the product is working, which we have no indication of resistance to cutworms, they should all be dead, given enough time for those molted ones to come out and start feeding. And the other note about cutworms, they can be very patchy. So if you do find a heavy patch in a field, it is good to scout your field in several very different areas. Sometimes they can be very patchy in a field, and sometimes that depends on what was growing in a field the previous year. If there was an area of the field that was later flowering, it could have been a weedy patch, say a thistle patch, that drew the adult moths to lay their eggs in an area. So they can be patchy, so something to look for. There are good guys crawling around on the soil, wanting to feed on cutworms. Ground beetles are an example of actually a big group of predators. We've got a few hundred species of ground beetles in Manitoba, big group of predators that like to feed on cutworms. There's parasitoids like bee flies, tachinid flies, parasitic wasps. And if we do get some damper weather, fungal pathogens can sometimes kill a sizable number of cutworms as well. So regarding insecticides for cutworms, we've really got two groups of products. So the diamides and the pyrethroids. Diamides are your group 28s and pyrethroids are your group 3s. Within the diamides, there are some seed treatments. So products like Lumavia CPL. So Lumavia CPL, that's in cereals and pulse crops. In canola, we've got Lumiderm and Fortenza. Soybeans, there's Fortenza and Lumiderm as well. So that sunflowers, there's Fortenza. So we do have some seed treatments that are quite effective at controlling cutworms. The big question to ask yourself, though, is what is your risk? There's going to be extra cost, of course, to your seed having these added on cutworm seed treatments. So the big question is the extra cost worth the benefit I'm likely to gain from them? And it's hard for me to answer the question for an agronomist or farmer, is it worthwhile? A lot does depend on the situation that's been happening on and around your farm over the past few years. Cutworm populations do move around. They're not always in the same field year after year, because again, it depends on what was growing in that field and what would have been attractive to the egg-laying moths in August. August and early September is when most of the eggs would get laid. So it's a tough call whether that seed treatment is going to be worthwhile. And again, it does depend on the history of what's been happening in your area. Now, aside from the diamides, we've got the pyrethroids as another group. So that's your Matadors, Desis, Ambush, those products. Fairly quick acting, work quite well, relatively cheap. For sprays, Coragen Max, Coragen, or the newer product, Shenzi, very long residual, very good on cutworms. Bit higher priced than the pyrethroids. However, that price might be coming down a bit now that the patent is up and Shenzi's on the market. So the difference in price between the pyrethroids and Coragen or Shenzi may not be as great as it was in past years. So we'll move on to flea beetles. And one of the things that I always stress with flea beetles is, as a canola grower, your big challenge is getting your canola to the 3 to 4 leaf stage in 3 to 4 weeks. The seed treatments that you have, whether you've gone with one of the Helix or Prosper products, or you've got one of the ones with the extra ingredients like a buteo-start or lumiderm, I usually suggest 3 to 4 weeks. Something like a buteo, some of the add-ons, you might get that extra 4th week. But plan for that. Plan that after roughly that 3 to 4 week period, and that's after seeding, not when the plants come up. 3 to 4 weeks after seeding, your seed treatment is probably going to start to become less effective. And in that case, you really have to keep an eye on things and then assess, do we need to be doing a foliar spray? And it's very hit and miss. So much depends on the weather. If we get good conditions, good soil moisture, good growing conditions, there are years where quite a bit of the canola can get to that 3 to 4 leaf stage within those 3 to 4 weeks. But it can be very weather dependent. There's things you can do to maybe reduce the risk. Certainly seeding date can help. If you're seeding too early into cool soil and it's going to take longer for germination to occur and the earlier growth to occur, that might put you at a bit greater risk. Seeding depth, I would only go as deep as you need to. Going too deep, again, just holds the plants back a bit more, makes them a bit more vulnerable. Seeding rate, higher seeding rates equal more plants, equal less damage per plant. But I realize the economics of seeding rates depends on price quite a bit. But again, if you go too low, just to be aware that you probably are at a bit more risk of the flea beetle feeding getting economical. So again, you just have to keep an eye on the plants and watch them carefully, especially if you do have some of those factors that put you at higher risk. If you need more information on flea beetles and monitoring, decision-making products, we do have a fact sheet on our website that I try to keep updated. One of the things that I added in the last time I updated the fact sheet was a scouting guide. And so this photo, the series of photos you see here show different amounts of flea beetle feeding to the cotyledons. One of the things that's really tricky when you're trying to make that decision, do I or don't I apply my foliar spray? It's really tricky to assess flea beetle feeding, and the ratings that we give are very subjective, and it's really easy to overrate and call something that might be 10, 15% damage, 25, 30, because again, it's very subjective. So hopefully this photo key is helpful. So at the top here, we've got 16%, 13, and 13. There's a lot of pits on these, but there's a lot more green than there are pits. If this is as bad as the flea beetle feeding is going to get, the canola crop will recover quite nicely from that amount of feeding. For the threshold, right around 25%. So this middle row here, if most of the plants look like this and there's still a lot of flea beetles in your field and the weather seems to be conducive, you've got some days coming up that are in the 20s and fairly calm, that's conditions and situations where that foliar spray is likely to be a good economic decision. And certainly once you're above that, once you get around 30, 40%, yeah, you probably should be treating the crops. What is complicated here, this is just showing you cotyledon feeding. One of the things that's really hard to factor in for flea beetles is stem feeding. And that's something else you have to keep an eye on. If there's a lot of stem feeding occurring, plants are toppling over, you do need to factor that in as well. So it's kind of an art and a science doing flea beetle scouting. So here's the insecticides for flea beetles. And once again, we've got really just a few groups that kind of dominate. Your seed treatments, they've all got a neonicotinoid base to them. So a Helix, a Prosper, those would be the two most common for your neonic bases. And then you have your add-ons, a diamide to create Lumiderm and Fortenza. And these seed treatments will give you cutworm control plus flea beetles. If it's just a Helix or Prosper. You'll get your flea beetle protection. Don't bank on getting any kind of enhanced cutworm control with them. That's what the Lumiderm and Fortenza would provide you. Buteo Start, again, some extra ingredients added in that will extend the life a bit for that flea beetle control. But again, once you get beyond about 4 weeks, be scouting your field. We have encountered fields where people who had Buteo Start had to do foliar sprays. It's not a guarantee. You are not going to have to do foliar sprays. So again, after 4 weeks, be scouting the fields. For foliar sprays, the pyrethroids are very heavily used. So that's your Decis and all the many versions of that. Matador, another one that would get used quite a bit. Some people like Pounce or Ambush. They're all pyrethroids, same group. Really the only non-pyrethroid that we have that gets used much for foliar spray is 7, which is a carbamate. Malathion, I don't think it's used a lot for flea beetles. Availability sometimes is an issue as well. So we're using a lot of pyrethroids. I know there's been speculation whether or not we're developing resistance to the pyrethroids with all the foliar spraying we do. There is a study that is trying to determine if that is occurring. Boyd Maury at the University of Alberta, he's doing a study on insecticide resistance in flea beetles. And I have sent in a couple populations from Manitoba. Both cases, it was a situation where growers in the area were concerned that their pyrethroid sprays weren't killing the flea beetles. The situations where we sprayed, and then a few days later, our fields were full of flea beetles again, and we're doing another spray. So collected some beetles, sent them in. In Boyd's tests, the control beetles, the control beetles were not affected, but the insecticide treated ones, the pyrethroid treated ones, 100% kill. So at this point, at least from the fields that got sampled in Manitoba, at this point, there's no evidence of pyrethroid resistance. I think what's happening is that the flea beetles are just so numerous that they're just reinvading the field. But it's something that we can continue to check on. Hopefully, I'll get a few more samples into Boyd this year. And I just wanted to make a note here. This is kind of damage control from a comment made at Ag Days. Someone from the US was up speaking on multiple agronomy topics and happened to mention that the flea beetles that have been released for leafy spurge, he wasn't convinced they wouldn't feed on canola. And I'm here to tell you they will not feed on canola. That comment should never have been made. There's been lots of research on this, both in Europe and in Canada. The flea beetles that feed on leafy spurge are the Aphthona flea beetles, which are very, very specific in what they will feed on. They will feed on leafy spurge and nothing but leafy spurge. And again, that's been backed up by data in multiple countries. Here's one of the bigger studies in Canada that was done on this, where they were taking these Aphthona species. We brought them over from Europe. They've been released for leafy spurge. In some areas, they're doing a really good job controlling leafy spurge, or at least managing it. The spurge doesn't disappear, but it's reduced to levels where it's less of an impact. The flea beetles are working well, but again, they're a whole different group of flea beetles, and in multiple tests, they will starve rather than feed on canola. So if you're at Ag Day, heard that comment, ignore it, please. Leafy spurge flea beetles do not feed on canola. So grasshoppers, I'll touch on them, and then I'll move on to some insecticides. And I'll just go over the grasshoppers quickly, and mainly regarding what to expect in 2025. So last year, we saw a bit of a decline in grasshoppers from the past few years, actually. 2021, 2, 3, they were fairly bad grasshopper years in many areas. And then 2024, we still had grasshopper issues, but really it was a handful of fields that I'm aware of that got sprayed, a little bit of edge spraying, but not nearly to the same scale as the previous few years. And that possibly is because we had a very wet May and June, wet and cool. We had some very heavy rains around the time the grasshoppers would have been emerging, hatching from their eggs. That may have knocked the population back a bit. So that was good news for 2024. So what about 2025? We do a survey every year where we go out and we look at grasshoppers and we do a forecast for the next year. So this is our forecast map based on our survey from 2024. We went out to 107 fields, did grasshopper counts mainly around the field edge. When I say we, people like Lionel, our crop extension specialist, they do quite a few of these counts. The map shows some moderate populations, a lot of light populations. But my main message, though, is in spite of what the map is showing, I would still be on guard for grasshoppers in 2025. And the reason I say that is that the map is the survey from 2024. But the true forecast, you also have to factor in weather conditions. What were the conditions like when they were laying eggs? Would they have been able to lay their maximum complement of eggs? What are the natural enemies like? These are things that can be factored into some degree, especially the weather component. We had really good egg laying conditions for the grasshoppers that were present. Most of the eggs get laid in August and into September. For the species that are pest species of grasshoppers, one of the reasons that they're considered pest species is they can lay a lot of eggs. They can build their populations up if they get those good conditions. August was maybe slightly warmer than normal. September was well above normal temperature-wise. In most regions, it was at least 5 degrees warmer than normal. So they had warm days, not a lot of rain, with maybe one exception in the east where they had a big rainstorm. The first widespread frost was October 3rd, so quite late. For grasshoppers, they probably couldn't ask for much better in the way of egg laying conditions. Warm, late frost. So even if you're in an area that is green on the map, I wouldn't be totally complacent because they did have some pretty good egg laying conditions. So something to be watching for. So in June, when you're out there scouting, have a look at your field edges, particularly areas where historically you've had some grasshopper issues, and just see what the levels might be like. We don't want to let our guard down regarding the grasshoppers. In our survey, we also look at dominant species. Two-striped was by far the dominant species this year, but we are starting to see a little bit of a resurgence of migratory grasshopper as well. Both of these are generalist feeders. They will feed on a lot of crops, both broadleaf and grassy crops. And clearwing grasshoppers, they are grass feeders. So if you have them as your dominant species, it's your grasses that are more at risk. So before I get to the insecticides, Lionel sent me a few photos. I thought I would pop these up just to address what they might be. When you're doing your crop scouting in the spring and the soil is quite black, there's not a lot of green up yet, it's often easy to see these little red specks crawling around on the soil. This is a good picture. It's heavily magnified. These are called red velvet mites. You don't have to worry about these. These are actually good. They prey on insect eggs and small insects and mites and things. When they get to be, when they lay their eggs and are going through their development stages, the immatures of these red velvet mites, they're parasites of insects. And often you end up seeing them on grasshoppers. If you look under the wings of the grasshoppers, they like to get underneath the wings, and sometimes you will see them under there. They're feeding on the grasshopper blood, hemolymph. It can weaken the grasshoppers. Doesn't often kill them, but it can weaken them. But regardless, red velvet mites, if you see them while you're out crop scouting, they're a good guy. Don't worry about them. This photo here, there's actually 3 things to point out. So on the left, that's the wireworm, that yellowish color. Sometimes they can be almost an orangey color. Sometimes they're a bit more lighter yellow, depending on the species. We've got a couple dominant species here. They usually have sort of this forked pattern at the last abdomen segment. And if you're wanting to know, is it a wireworm or maybe a caterpillar of some sort, flip it over. Wireworms will have 3 pair of small legs up near the front, but no of the fleshy prolegs at the back. On the right of your screen, we've got some cutworms here. So this one, you can see the patterning down the back. This will be a dingy cutworm. If you flip this one over, it would have the 3 legs at the front and the fleshy legs along the back. And this pale white insect up at the top here on the right-hand photo, that's neither cutworm or wireworm. That belongs to a group of flies called the therivid flies, or stiletto flies, as the common name is. They have no legs. They're very, very quick. They eat things like cutworms and wireworms. So if you start seeing them, that's good. They're a predator. Okay, so insecticides. I'll just cover a few of the newer products that you might be hearing about this year. The first one I've already mentioned is Shenzi. So the active ingredient is chlorantraniliprole, which is the exact same ingredient as Coragen Max. So it's a generic version, which is probably good news. Another version of that active ingredient. And again, now that the patent is up, the price will probably come down a bit. With daltemethrine is your Decis, Polesi. There's a couple new versions of it, Rama and Decimate. So again, these are same active ingredient as what is in Decis. And one label expansion that may be of interest to alfalfa seed growers. Alfalfa weevil is a real nuisance to control for alfalfa seed growers. If you're a hay grower, you can cut the crop a bit early if alfalfa weevil gets to be too much of an issue. But for seed growers, you don't have that option. And we've had some real issues with alfalfa weevil and insecticides not working well. One of the projects I'll be working on this year is doing a study to test pyrethroid insecticides for potential alfalfa weevil resistance. So something I'll be working on this year. In the meantime, there's a newer product on the market called a Sail. It's actually not a new product in the hort sector. It does have some other field crop uses, but the label has been expanded to include alfalfa weevil in alfalfa seed. So that's just alfalfa seed, not for forage crops. Again, it is used in the hort industry a bit. It'll be a little bit pricier than, say, a pyrethroid will be. But if you're a alfalfa seed grower, you've had mixed or limited success with some of the other alternatives for alfalfa weevil, a Sail might be something for you to consider. And lastly, regarding insecticides, lambda-cyhalothrin. So this is your Matador silencer and a few other generic versions, as well as Volium Express. There were issues in the past few years that you could not feed crops treated with lambda-cyhalothrin to livestock, which meant that if you were a canola grower, the canola meal could not be fed to the livestock. And because of that, we were advising people to be very cautious using lambda-cyhalothrin on any field crop, just because it might affect the marketability of the crop. The livestock feed uses have been reinstated on the label. So those restrictions on livestock feed, they've been, again, reinstated. So now crop canola sprayed with Matador or silencer, you can market it for the oil, and the meal can go for livestock feed. So hopefully that's clear. Those livestock feed restrictions that were previously put on have been lifted. So you can use Matador silencer, any of the generic versions, the way you had been prior to those restrictions. And if that's not clear, get in touch with me, please, because it's important that you understand the restrictions, or in this case, lifting of restrictions on that group of products. And I talked about insecticide resistance a little bit already. The other one I'll just mention here regarding insecticide resistance is soybean aphids. We had a situation last year where a couple soybean fields in the eastern part of the province were sprayed with a pyrethroid for soybean aphids. The insecticide did not work up to expectations. I did go out to the field and collect some soybean aphids and was putting them in vials with the pyrethroid, and I'll say there was mixed results. There was a little bit of residue in the vial, so it was hard for me to be totally conclusive, but at least there was a hint that we did have some insecticide resistance happening in those fields. And it wouldn't be the first time that we've seen pyrethroid resistance in our Manitoba soybean aphids. I don't think the resistance develops here. I think what happens, soybean aphids get oversprayed in parts of the US. It's something that's done at times when the soybean aphids aren't at economic threshold, which does increase the risk of resistance developing. And I think what's happening is the aphids are getting blown in, and we're basically having pyrethroid resistant aphids blowing in. So again, not the fault of our growers. I don't think we're overspraying for soybean aphids and creating the issues. We're basically inheriting a problem that's occurring. If you're looking for alternatives to the pyrethroids, you do have some products such as Safina, which are really good on soybean aphids. Good residual. I'll say reasonably priced, but hard to get your hands on. Last year, when we had some of the soybean aphid issues, I know people were looking for Safina and just couldn't find it. So availability can be a problem. Movento and Savanto Prime, they're semi-selective products in a different group. They should work well, but they will probably be a bit more expensive than, say, the Safina would. And the pyrethroids are the cheapest option, but again, we've had resistance for soybean aphids, so just something to be careful with. I'm going to go over my insect monitoring programs really quickly because I don't want to run us out of time here. I do want to show you some resources as well. But just to mention, we do have several insect monitoring programs that we run annually. Diamondback moth, Bertha armyworm, grasshoppers, armyworms are among the programs. There's a couple newer insects in the province that we've been monitoring with now annual surveys. Cabbage seed pod weevil, which is the top photo here, and pea leaf weevil. Cabbage seed pod weevil we first found in 2017 in Manitoba. We've been following the progress of this insect and watching its expansion in Manitoba and keeping an eye on the level. I'll just show you some stats in a second here. And I've got a few other insects listed here. Hessian fly is one you probably haven't seen on my list before. It's a new one that I'll be monitoring this year. And it's more of a project to have a look at. Are we starting to see a bit of a resurgence in their populations? It's an insect that really has been pretty low-key in cereal grains in the prairies in recent years. Last year, there was a hint that populations might be building a little bit. So my goal this year is to get a pheromone-baited trap, very similar to the ones we use for Swede midge. I want to get traps into at least 10 fields across Manitoba. Ideally, a few of those fields I would like to be wheat on wheat if we have them and can find them, because wheat on wheat is at a greater risk of Hessian fly. So if anybody is interested in putting up a trap for Hessian fly, let me know. I'll send you one. They can be a tricky insect to identify on an insert. We will be sending the inserts to a lab in Alberta, at the University of Alberta. They will be doing the identification because they're interested in the population dynamics of this insect. So I'll basically be collecting inserts and sending them off. And diamondback moth, our delta traps, we'll be putting those up the first week in May. For people putting up the traps, target that first week in May. Even if the canola is not seeded or in the ground, we can still get the traps up and see if any diamondback moth are blowing in. Bertha armyworm, that's usually the first or second week in June. I'll keep an eye on the temperature and the likely development of the pupa and let you know for sure as we get closer to June. But usually early June, we put the traps up for Bertha armyworm and keep them up throughout June and July. Armyworms, so this is the armyworm that likes to eat on cereals. We put a different style trap called a multi-fur trap up. Usually I've been targeting about 40 or 50 fields across the province for this insect. And it's basically to see what the populations that are migrating north are like. Have they arrived in Manitoba? And if so, what part of Manitoba? Last year, it was the east and Interlake that seemed to get a lot of them. The western part of the province barely saw them. So it does help to put some traps up for armyworm as well. So I'll have, again, about 40 or 50 sets. Cabbage seed pod weevil, I mentioned that's a newer invasive insect that moved into Manitoba in 2017. As I'm surveying for cabbage seed pod weevil, I'm also keeping an eye open for pollen beetle, a small, almost flea beetle-like insect that would lay eggs onto the buds. They would have clubbed antennae, though. But what we do is we do 25 sweeps at 3 locations in a field, put it in a bag, freeze it, and then back at the lab, I go through them and I pick out any cabbage seed pod weevils. I encourage anyone who would like to participate in this survey, get in touch with me. It's not hard to do. 3 sets of 25 sweeps, transfer it to a bag, send them to me, and I'll let you know if there's been cabbage seed pod weevils in your sample. We've been doing this since 2017. Just to give you an idea what our levels are like. So in 25 sweeps, an economic threshold would be 63 to 100 cabbage seed pod weevils in 25 sweeps. The highest we've ever got in Manitoba is 6 in 25 sweeps. So that's the highest. And that's, again, 1/10 of an economic threshold. So basically what's been happening, the weevil has been expanding. It was located in the southwest initially. And you can see it, Medora, Lauder, Brandon. It was all the eastern region until 2021. It was found near Gladstone, then Carmen, Starbuck, and last year just west of Morris. So it is expanding its range, but so far the levels have stayed well below economic threshold, which is good news. And I'm just going to skip ahead here. Maybe I'm going to skip over the pea leaf weevil survey. I'll just mention really briefly, we do a survey for pea leaf weevil as well, another weevil. The larvae feed on the nodules on the roots of peas and can cause nitrogen deficiency. We've been finding a lot more of the pea leaf weevil in the northwest and a little bit in the southwest, less in the central region. We do a survey where we count notches on the very young leaves of the pea plants to estimate what levels are like. And we'll be doing that again this year. So if anyone is growing peas or interested in pea leaf weevil, get in touch with me and I'll include you in that survey. As far as resources go, our Manitoba Agriculture website, we've got a list of fact sheets. So if you go to our insect page at the Manitoba Agriculture website, you'll see our list of fact sheets. And at the bottom of this would be links to where our insect monitoring program data is kept. So that's all there. Manitoba crop pest updates, starting in about late May. We produce a weekly Manitoba crop pest update. What we try to do is collect information from agronomists, farmers, anyone scouting crops, what they've been seeing over the past week in their fields. We compile that information. We try to summarize it, produce a concise report, basically stating, here's what people are seeing and taking note of in the various regions, and we'll provide a few scouting tips. We try to keep it concise, and again, keep a good summary of what has been reported. So we encourage people, if you are seeing insect, weed, disease issues, let us know so we can get them into our report. And we do have an email notification list whenever we produce one of these reports. If you would like to receive the email notifications and you're not on the list, let me know and we'll get you put on that list. Guide to Crop Protection is out. So if you don't have a copy, it is available now. With the insecticides, one of the things that we produce is for every major field crop commodity, we have an insect management chart, and that will provide a list of all the insects that feed on that commodity. And within each of those insect groupings, you have the registered products, the rates, the pre-harvest intervals. So if you were trying to decide what do I use for cutworms in canola, you'd go to the canola insect management chart, find cutworms, that's your full list of products. And for later season insects, maybe Lygus bug, pre-harvest interval might be good to take note of because that might limit what you can use as well. PMRA, they've got a data search engine for pesticide labels. That might be a useful tool to many agronomists and farmers. You can pull up any pesticide label from this site, get the full label. So good resource. Pest and Predators Field Guide, they're free. Just go to fieldheroes.ca. You can order a free copy. That provides information on mainly the beneficial insects that you'd be finding in your fields. We do have some pest information in there as well. But I should probably end with that because it's about 10:02, and if we have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Okay, John. Yeah, there's been a few questions coming in. I think the first one you might have answered, and it was regarding Matador and can it be sprayed in Western Canada? Will elevators accept the grain? So I think you answered that with the new easing of the registration, right?
The short answer is yes, it can be sprayed and they will accept the grain. Again, those restrictions that were causing the marketing issues, they've been lifted.
Okay. The next question is, if a grower has the ability to apply an insecticide in furrow, say in corn, beans, or sunflowers to control cutworm, are there any that can be used that way?
There are, I'll say some, but very, very few. Not in sunflowers. Sunflowers, really your only option is a product called Fortenza. Fortenza is a seed treatment, so an add-on seed treatment. But yeah, that's really your only option in sunflowers. In corn, it's the same thing. There is an in-furrow product, but it's not really for cutworms. For cutworms in corn, Lumavia and Fortenza are the two things that are registered. The product they might be thinking of is Semigra. And Semigra is registered for wireworms and corn rootworm in corn, but it's not registered for cutworms. The problem with Semigra, it's not systemic. So it would work on insects below the ground, like wireworms, corn rootworm, but it's not going to be taken up by the plant the way, say, a neonic would. So possibly if there was subterranean cutworms, like glassy cutworm, it would kill them. But things like red-backed, dingy, you might not get good results. So if you're planning to use the in-furrow products in corn, like a Semigra, you're targeting below-ground insects. For cutworms, if that's your prime target, use either a seed treatment like Lumavia or Fortenza, or go with a foliar spray later, like a Coragen or one of the pyrethroids like Matador.
Okay. Are there any benefits to tank mixing pyrethroids and carbamates for better and longer lasting control of flea beetles?
Yeah, good question. I don't have good data on that one, to be honest. You might extend the residual a little bit with the carbamate, but problem is if you're doing that, you're probably doing half rates, and if you are, you may not get the residual extension that you were looking for. Pyrethroids are very quick kill. Again, carbamate, there might be a little bit extra residual. I just haven't seen good data, though, to really I guess, back end he claimed that you would get a better control that way.
Okay, and one last one. When they were doing the resistance checking on flea beetles, are they checking both the stripe and the, I guess, the black flea beetle?
Short answer is yes. So this is a complicated question, actually. Mainly what we've been finding recently is crucifer flea beetles. I know there was all this speculation that striped were going to take over because they're more tolerant to the neonicotinoids, not resistant, more tolerant. There is a difference. And at one point, one of the surveys showed that stripes were becoming a bit more common across the prairies. When we've been collecting flea beetles for this resistance project, we've been looking at what we've been finding, and crucifer has been the dominant species that we've been finding. So most of the tests have been done mainly on crucifers, is the short answer to that one. Now, striped flea beetle, again, this is a tricky thing. Jim Tansey years ago did a study that showed that when you expose striped and crucifer flea beetles to a neonicotinoid, you get better kill of the crucifers. You still get kill of the stripes, just not to the same percentage. And it's not resistance. It's not any inherited resistance. It's just they're a bit more tolerant. So hopefully that's not confusing. But those earlier studies did not show resistance to stripes. It showed some tolerance.
Okay, well, thanks, John. That was a really good and informative presentation, and a lot of good information that I think we can use during the growing season here. And I'm sure we're going to be calling on you as we go through the growing season here. Next, I wanted to bring, I think Kim is on the line, and John already mentioned that the field crop production guides are out. Kim, do you want to make a few comments regarding availability, where to get them, if somebody wants to make a large order? Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. You guys can hear me okay?
You bet.
Okay, sorry, I'm on the road, but I've pulled over. Yeah, so we've got the guides have been in now for probably just about a month. And so there are at the 10 service centers. So there should be a good number of those still available. Our guide sales have been pretty steady, but they'll go on until probably mid-May and then they taper off a bit. But if anybody needs bulk orders or big orders, or you can't get to a service center and want us to ship them from Carmen, we can certainly do that. So give me a call. Lionel has my number there. I can give it now. It's 431-344-0239, or my email is kim.brown@gov.mb.ca. So give me a call. We can get them shipped out to you if that's the easiest way to get them to you. And the odd time too, we can get some staff members to drop them off if we've got staff members in the area that have guides on hand. So we do have lots of guides and we want to get them out to you guys as quick as possible. So whatever we can do to make that happen, we will be happy to help.
Okay, yeah, and like Kim mentioned, if you need her contact information, you can get a hold of myself or lawyer Aaron or any of the crop extension specialists, and all their contact information will be coming up here shortly. Okay, the next slide is some things to start marking your calendar for. Our diversification centers have decided on their dates for this year's spring tour or summer tours, and there's the information there for the 4 different diversification centers. So mark those on your calendar, as they're really good informative days. Also, if you want to contact the diversification centers, here's their contact person, as well as information for location and their email addresses. So if you want more information regarding their tours or just any of the stuff that's happening at the sites, get a hold of them. They can definitely fill you in and get you any extra information you may want or need. I'd like to wish Terry Buss, one of our extension guys who's retired, and wish him a happy retirement from Manitoba Ag. I'm sure he's he hasn't left agriculture. He's going to be working with pulse growers. So, he's retired from Manitoba Agriculture. So there's the crop production extension people that are left with the province here right now. And so again, if you're looking for your crop protection guides or just any general information regarding during the growing season, or if you've got interested in some of the insect monitoring programs John talked about, contact us and we can definitely get you the information and get you on our list to be working with you. Andrea Berthlet, she also retired from Manitoba Agriculture. She was one of the livestock specialists, and this is the livestock specialist remaining. So if you need any information, I know a lot of producers are heavy into calving right now. So if you're having issues with feed, I know there's been a lot of questions regarding some of the feed from talking to the livestock people that and they're getting a lot of questions regarding feed. And so if you got questions, definitely contact them and they can help you through and do some rations for you and help you get prepared for pasture, because we are hopefully not too long away from starting to look at fixing fence and getting cattle out. Kim mentioned that the crop protection guides are at the MASC service centers. There's the locations in the province, and soon again to be in Shoal Lake and Burden. But right now the books are there. If you're in those areas and want a book, definitely stop by and pick them up. Or again, like I mentioned, contact any of us. And if you got questions, you got ideas for different crop talks, give us a call. We'll definitely look at it. Next week, April 23rd, I'd like you to join us for a weather update with Allison Sass. And we're going to have a mini update on assessing the winter wheat crop with Ann Kirk. So join us next Wednesday, the 23rd. Thanks for attending, and thanks, John, for the great presentation.